I feel bad for Brian. I feel bad for Brian. I feel bad for Kirk. I think that's a natural human response to the situation. I tweeted this morning that multiple things can be true at the same time, one of which being this move needed to happen, whether it was now, whether it was before the season. Obviously, end of last season would have been preferable, or at the end of this season. The bottom line is the move is being made, and that's another step in the right direction. But at the same time, I can also say I have full confidence. Brian loves this university. He's a former player. He's been coaching here for a long time now in total, and I do feel bad for him. But I think he'll get on his feet. My guess is he'll get a job somewhere in the league and probably be an O-line coach at some point if he's not one right away. And maybe he'll get another chance at being a coordinator in college. He's only like 40 years old. So you never know. But this is a step in the right direction. I felt bad for Kirk watching him today during his media availability, but I thought he handled himself well and answered all questions as best you would expect him to in this situation. He had some cheerful banter, which is kind of typical of a Kirk press conference, even though I'm sure it was a very, very hard day to appear before the media and all those cameras.
Yeah, certainly, folks, anybody listening, anyone watching right now who has not had an opportunity to really dive into what has transpired, obviously knowing the news itself, but not the discussion and so forth. Check out all of Corey's work at from the Hawkeye of the Storm. I posted my thoughts. That video is available on the main channel as well. And I said the same thing, that regardless of where you stand on his work, I don't want to and don't take any joy in anyone getting fired unless they have done something dishonest or there's been some kind of misconduct. But in no way do I think that Brian Ferentz was negligible in any way in regards to his effort, his giving his very best to do his best for a school that presumably he loves and, as you mentioned, attended and played for. So, yeah, that you said it very well in regards to that being just indescribably difficult for Kirk to then have to go through that situation, face the media, and answer all those questions. So I'm going to start, because there's so many things we could talk about, and I can't imagine we're going to cover anything here that you did not cover. I certainly was pretty exhaustive in my thoughts. I was comprehensive. I could have talked a lot more about the job that Brian Ferentz did and why this was necessary myself. But I'll start with this. Were you surprised?
I was surprised with the timing. I mean, I know it was being tossed around. The rumblings were out there over the weekend, it sounds like. I never got wind of those rumblings until early Monday morning. And so, yeah, I was surprised with the timing of it. And if you're going to do something during a bye week, you would think you'd maybe do it last week and give everybody an extra week to prep. I saw some people sent me a theory on social media that, this was not meant to be publicized at this point, but it got leaked. And so Iowa had to kind of transition and announce it earlier than they wanted to, but the conversations, the decisions were already made. I don't necessarily believe that, but again, I don't know. I think Beth Goetz deserves a lot of credit. I saw a former player, somebody, again, people send me these things all the time. I don't follow a bunch of people on Twitter or on Instagram, but somebody sent me either a tweet or a Snapchat or something of a former Iowa fullback who will remain nameless, ripping into Beth Goetz about how she's cowardly and how it was a pathetic move on her part to do this at this point in the season. All I can say to that, and I don't know this former player personally, that's ridiculous in my opinion. People have been chiming for this move for so long, and we're really going to complain because the move took place 4 games before the end of a season in which the offense is dead last in the FBS. I understand that there may be some downsides to this, but there are also positives making this move in late October as opposed to waiting until December. One thing, Mark, as you well know, the transfer portal window opens in early December. So you're talking basically right after the regular season is done. You have this portal opening where guys are going to be throwing their names in that portal. And who's to say that guys don't have their minds made up? I mean, I I know just having a conversation the other day with a Division I player, not at Iowa, but a Division I FBS player that basically told me he's planning on entering the portal when that window opens. We're in October. So some guys make up their minds early, and this at least gives Iowa some time to possibly convince some of those players who are thinking about leaving to stay. And, I'm not saying the offense is going to look any different in the next 4 months, but at least people, I don't know if that's Kirk or who would be kind of convincing these players, just the move itself could convince somebody to reconsider going somewhere else with the hopes that, hey, maybe Iowa brings in someone that I'm more compatible with, that I think will get this offense going, specifically the passing game. I think that's, wide receiver play, quarterback play. Those are really the two positions that we have seen Iowa struggle recruiting at the most, although they've done decent at quarterback. They haven't developed guys. So, that might be part of it. And the other part of it is, 20 years ago, Mark, we didn't have this early signing day in December. And although I don't think this will change things, like I don't know that Brian being let go in early December would have made a whole lot of difference. But I think it's fair to the players that are committed already to know, hey, this change is happening, as opposed to letting them sign in December. They play a bowl game 2 weeks later, and then he's gone. Hey, we're getting rid of the guy you just signed to play for. So again, those are all variables. I just don't agree with that take. And I think people who say that or are making those comments against Beth Goetz are in the minority. I think a lot of people have applauded Beth Goetz. This was most likely pressure to above Beth. And that's based on a number of things that I've heard. It sounds like there was some pressure. And she even mentioned it in her email that President Wilson was involved with this decision. And, who knows what the big donors, we've been talking about those big donors in the poll that they have with this program. Who knows what donors, if any, were kind of pressuring Beth to make this move, even though she's the interim AD. And my guess is she was given reassurance or assurance that she had the power as the interim AD to make this move as she did. And I actually thought she handled it the way I would have liked her to handle it. Again, you can debate on whether or not the move should have been made in a few weeks or in a month and a half or now. But I do appreciate the fact that she didn't mince words in her release. She said, I have informed Brian this. This is not Kirk's decision. This is not Brian's decision. It's my decision. And based on what I was told, Brian was given the opportunity to just resign. And he chose not to. And that's his prerogative. I don't blame him for that. Certainly, if the option was, hey, we want you to resign during the middle of the season or I'm going to let you go, I can see why Brian wouldn't want to resign midseason. That makes sense to me. So whatever the reason was, maybe he wouldn't have resigned in December or January either. But I commend Beth for how she's handled it because, again, I'm not behind closed doors, but it's a difficult position to be in. She addressed the media today as she should. All right. She addressed the media, didn't really give too many exorbitant answers. I applaud Kirk for addressing the media. I have no problem with him withholding players this week. No problem at all with that. I think that's wise. And I think that's a coach who's been coaching a long, long time and is the dean of college football that understands that this could become a distraction. It's not, trying to protect Brian or protect Kirk. Kirk faced the media today, but he doesn't want his players to be bombarded with questions about Brian Ferentz. How is that fair to them? Let them focus on the game this Saturday. It's going to be a test on the road against a dangerous Northwestern team that's proven they can score points and make big plays. And it's also in a weird venue at Wrigley. And Iowa's coming off a bye week. So, I don't have any problem with that. I'll be anxious to see if we get Brian in the final month of the year, because here's the deal, Mark. The media has gotten access to a bunch of assistants every Wednesday morning throughout the season. Last year, we got Brian like week one after the win against South Dakota State. This year, we have not gotten Brian yet. We've gotten Abdul Hodge. We've gotten Liddell Betts. We've gotten George Barnett. We've gotten Kelton Copeland. I believe we've gotten Phil Parker and LeVar Woods. We've got to be getting close to the only other guy left, which would be Brian. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle media with him. But here's what I'll say, and I complimented Brian yesterday, last night on the show, and I'll say it again. People know I have been very critical of Kirk, very critical of Brian as it relates to this offense. And I'm not the only one, of course, that's been critical of those two guys as it relates to the offense performance in recent time. But I will say this. I believe that Brian will coach as hard as he has throughout his entire tenure. He'll coach as hard as he ever has this last month and a half of the season. and he will face the media. I doubt he's going to cower away and avoid the camera, so to speak. I don't believe that Brian is a coward. I believe, again, like I said earlier, that he loves this university. And frankly, Mark, I could see this. I don't think we're going to see some drastic shift in play calling these final 4 weeks of the season. But here's what I will say. And this is me going out on a limb because we don't see this much from Iowa in general. If they make the Big Ten championship game, and they probably need to go, they need to go at least 9-3 to do that. Probably go 10-2. They probably need to win these last 4 games. And they're playing an Ohio State or a Michigan in the Big Ten title game. My guess is Brian will throw everything he possibly can at that East Division opponent, because it may be Brian's last chance in the national spotlight as a play caller of a Big Ten football team. Think about that. Like, why wouldn't you? We've talked about that in the past. Why wouldn't you throw everything you have at Michigan in the Big Ten championship game in 2021? And they really didn't. I don't think they did. They had a trick play or two, but got beat 42-3 and didn't really have any wrinkles the last 3 quarters of the game. My guess is if they make it to the Big Ten championship game, we will see Iowa take some unorthodox shots, and that could produce an interesting game in early December against an elite opponent, maybe.
So first of all, with Beth Getz and the move that she made, I would agree that it's not cowardly. If anything, I could understand possibly some other criticisms of it, although I don't have any. But cowardly would be the last thing. That would be the last place where I would go. If anything, again, depending on where this originated, this move, whether it was thrust upon her or she very much was in on thinking in that direction, she's an interim AD. They could throw up her hands and say, I was inherited this. We're going to let the football season ride out. And we're 6-2. Not that she would say this publicly, but be thinking, why does there need to be a move made? I'm not going to get in the middle of something that I inherited, this mess. We'll deal with it in the offseason. So I thought it was the move that needed to be made, the move that was made. And I read her statement and other statements, and I have absolutely no criticism of how she handled it. I would say that
you could see other criticisms. So what would those other criticisms of the situation be?
Well, you in a sense went there with various aspects of whether this becomes a distraction to the players, having a coach who's a lame duck coach running the offense for the remainder of the season. But you also lined up the positives, dealing with recruiting, the early signing period, the transfer portal. I think all those things point to this being a more positive direction and decision to be made going forward, and not just as it relates to the 2023 season, because hopefully it doesn't impact, or maybe impacts in a positive way, the 23 season. Maybe it galvanizes the offense. Maybe it lights a fire under Brian in some way. I don't know that it needs to. I think he's doing his very best. But, stranger things have happened, and just adding a little juice, a little fire under them.
Well, first of all, the idea that idea was tossed around at the press conference today to Kirk Ferentz. And I understand the question, the idea of maybe, this being a distraction to offensive players. And although I agree with Kirk this week, taking the players away from the media, because there's just no reason to risk anything as it relates to the game on Saturday. But with that being said, the other reason why I would say I don't have a problem with the move being made when it was made, the offense is dead last in the FBS. They turned the ball over 3 times against Minnesota at home the other day. They turned the ball over against Michigan State with Deacon Hill. In fact, it was brought up by a reporter today at that press conference that Deacon, by some statistics, is considered to be the most turnover-prone FBS quarterback in the country. Well, I don't know how accurate that is. We've seen a somewhat small sample size from him. But, I know this sounds cliche, but how can it get worse? Maybe it can, but okay, players get distracted. What's that going to do? They're going to turn the ball over 8 times? Like, at some point, you can only go up, right? I don't think we risk falling any further by making a move at this point. And you're right. Maybe it ignites people. Maybe it ignites players to play for Brian. I don't know how close of a relationship. I'm sure there's guys that are close to Brian. I sure would hope so. And maybe it ignites Brian. I hope it does. I hope he uses this as an audition, maybe integrating his tight ends, even though he's down a couple of his best tight ends, showing off. Maybe he gets a tight ends coaching job in the league, or, maybe that run game starts clicking again. And, that would obviously help him potentially with his resume as an offensive line guy. He's a former center himself. So, yeah, I just don't have any issue with it. And Beth Getz is still putting herself out there, regardless if she was pressured and basically told by Barbara Wilson and whoever the powers that may be behind this that, hey, you got to make this decision, or if it was her decision primarily. It's putting yourself out there. Gary Barta didn't have the spine to do this for the last 3 years, and he'd been around the program, the AD, for forever, it felt like. She comes in, and 3 months into the job, she makes the move that most people want. And by the way, I think, I can't speak for that former player that posted about how upset that player was about the move and how Beth Getz performed this move. Some people, I think, are so wrapped into their political thinking that they equate a move like this with they equate that with how certain politicians may fold to pressure from the people, right? And that's one thing that was brought up. I don't know if it was the player or someone else said that, she folded to pressure from the people. I don't know why we have to look at this with a political view in mind whatsoever. We all sitting here as fans or analysts, we're looking at the offense, looking at the numbers, looking at the last 3 years, looking at the eye tests, production, the development, all these things. We have been saying for a long time, they need change here. And no one's claiming that Brian's the only problem, believe me. But I don't know how you could potentially move forward without making a change at OC. And so, best wishes to Brian. I have nothing against Brian. I wish him the best. And I doubt he ever coaches again at Iowa in any form. But I hope he has success and ends up achieving whatever his dreams are for himself. I hope he ends up achieving them.
Now, rarely do I endorse making a decision based on public perception. And I know that this wasn't. There's the performance obviously has dictated what the move needed to be. But in regards to the public perception, I don't know that Iowa fans, by and large, really understand what the calling card of this team has become nationally. And that's one of the things that I brought up in the video that I shot was by knowledgeable college football fans and media, what this team is known for is great defense and elite special teams play, and that the offense is dragging it down. But there's a balanced view of how good Iowa is overall and what the obvious strengths and weaknesses are. But to average Joe college football fan who doesn't even know maybe sometimes who Iowa even played the past Saturday, or maybe they just look at it because they know that the offensive totals are going to be anemic. And that I've got a certain perspective on this because I talk to college football people, media that cover other teams. And the first thing that comes to mind, what has become the brand of this program, and it's not right, it's not fair, it's not just, it's not earned to a large degree, is, yeah, they're the program that has this horrendous offense and it's a joke and it's unbelievably bad and they don't do anything about it.
By the way, you had some Yahoo post on your video from last night, which, by the way, I enjoyed. I actually fell asleep to it early this morning, so thank you for that. But
that's quite the endorsement.
You had some Yahoo comment on the video and and I responded to this person. Darn, that means Iowa might become a good program in the future. And I responded and said, the idea that Iowa hasn't been a good program is simply ignorant. Now, you could say that good is lies in the eye of the beholder. And that's what this individual responded. Well, my definition of good is clearly different than yours. Iowa's been a consistent top 30 program in the FBS since Kirk took over here. And I mean, again, top 30 and out of 130 FBS teams approximately throughout his tenure. That's good. Now, it's not elite. No one's claiming that it's elite. But I think 90% of college football, the college football world would say Iowa has been a good program. at the minimum, they've been a good program. So, anyways,
And I think top 30 is being rather conservative myself.
well, and that's right. I was being rather conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They've had years where they did finish in the top, 10, certainly the top 25.
Another question I have for you, and I'm guessing that anything I bring up, you've already talked about it ad nauseum, but still, I'm going to hit you with this because this struck me as well. So we often see coaching changes made during a bye week for obvious reasons. You get to jump on the preparation for the next week, whether it's mostly going to be somebody internal that's going to take over. If in fact this is a change that's made in which this person's dismissed immediately, that's typically what happens. So this happens in a bye week. However, it didn't happen, the day or 2 days after the Minnesota game. Usually there's an understanding that we're at this breaking point. Okay, another loss or another example of offensive ineptitude, whatever the case is for that particular situation, then okay, let's gather everyone, make sure we got our ducks in a row. We all agree this is the time. Okay, there's a full close to 2 weeks before the next game. Well, here we have a full week passes before the decision's made official and announced. I'm just wondering do you wonder if there was pushback from Kirk in any way that delayed this decision?
That's possible. That's possible. Like I said, it sounds like it was brewing before yesterday. I can tell you that. And I think it's pretty clear Kirk doesn't agree with the decision. Brian doesn't agree with the decision. And that's their prerogative. I do appreciate Kirk using the term today, chain of command. I thought that was his best response to every question he had during today's press conference. He brought up the late Hayden John Fry, and he brought up how Hayden used to talk about the chain of command. And he referred to, he was kind of initiating the military type of thinking with chain of command. And Kirk just said, there's a chain of command with everything here. And basically acknowledging that this was out of his hands. He respects the fact that there are people above him. And I thought it was a good response, whether he feels that or not. I think he does. I think he actually does. He's not happy about it, but he was not disrespectful to Beth Getz during the press conference. The other thing that may have been happening last week, Mark, in response to that loss to Minnesota, is it perhaps a situation where, given how they lost to Minnesota, you knew Iowa was going to consult with the Big Ten. Even they got a overturn from the NCAA on that targeting call against Carson Shire. But of course, the overturn against Cooper DeJean was so fresh, and we were talking about it all week long. Is it possible that maybe this announcement, they didn't want to make the announcement coming off that melee, right? I could see that being the case as well.
Yeah, there was a lot to deal with in the aftermath of that game, and not just being, okay, it was another game, another win, another loss in just a standard fashion. There was obviously, we're talking about the most controversial call in college football this season. And you wonder if they win that game, if that play stands, they don't lose the game. They're 7-1 right now. The offensive numbers and metrics are exactly the same if this move is made.
And Beth Getz she was asked about that today. Would this move have been made had Iowa been 7-1 right now? And basically she responded the way she should respond. She said, well, I'm not, here to talk about what could have happened, what would have happened. And she said that several times. Basically, I'm not here to talk about hypotheticals. I'm not here to share what happened behind closed doors. That's what she's supposed to say.
Yes.
She's not going to say that, well, when I made the announcement, Brian got up and locked the door and started pounding his fist on the table. I mean, we don't know what happened. We don't need to know what happened. Of course, the media is obligated to ask those questions. But so far, Beth has impressed me in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering how long it's going to take for them to remove that interim tag. I'd be shocked if they go anywhere else other than Beth Getz at this point.
Corey, there's one other aspect of this I'd like to get to and ask your opinion on before we bring in Bradley Locker. We've got Bradley coming in from Inside the U to talk Inside NU to talk Northwestern football and the matchup Saturday. Once I started to read some of the stories, there was nothing in the background of these stories, obviously, that was any surprise to me or information that I didn't know, I don't cover the team like you do, but I've got a pretty good handle on, what the results have been, what the offenses looked like, and all that business. But I do not remember us addressing at the time comments that Beth Getz made in August, in particular, maybe at other various times, but in August in particular, that really highlight that she wasn't going to come out and slam the contract stipulation and the way it was worded, and that there was just a clause and a bonus involved. But her wording, pretty much you can read into, she thought that it was strange. She used words like, this is a different type, unique situation. And then there was another phrase she used that was stronger than that, that, especially in the aftermath, really shows what she thought of that contract stipulation.
And I will say this: it was brought up. I believe it was the Wisconsin post game. I was up in Madison and did a post game prior to my show with Don, and I had somebody call in and ask why I commented that the contract was not necessarily initiated by Gary Barta. And this person was just shocked that I would say that. And I said, well, based on what I've been told, it wasn't. It wasn't a Gary Barta decision outright. There were other people at play here. And Kirk, and I basically at the time just said, look, I'm not commenting. I'm not at liberty to comment further. Kirk basically said today, a lot of the contract makeup was initiated by Brian. So there's your answer. So people wanted to call me crazy when I said that 2 weeks ago. Kirk brought that up today, and that's consistent with what I had been told. It was not necessarily the contract itself, the 25 point per game thing, and the 7 wins. That was not just a Gary Barta decision. And Gary, obviously he was involved with that. And I think Beth, like you said, has shown that she doesn't necessarily approve of the stipulations of that contract. And that could also bring us to another possibility as to why Beth wanted to make the decision now. And this may be the most unlikely of the scenarios as to why she did this. But is it possible? I mean, it's clear that they weren't going to hit the 25 point per game mark anyways. But is it possible that Beth wanted to make the call now to make it clear we're not letting him go because of the contract? The contract is ridiculous. That's not why we're letting him go. That's not how we evaluate our personnel. Kirk, we keep getting. I think it's almost humorous, and I understand why it's questioned this way. But Kirk is repeatedly asked about how he evaluates his staff, and more often than not, that's signaling, how are you going to evaluate Brian? Per the nepotism rules, Kirk was never supposed to be the one evaluating Brian. That's the whole problem with the situation. It was supposed to be the AD. And so regardless of, Kirk has said, well, I try not to deviate from the practice of letting guys go during the middle of the season. He stayed consistent with that because this was not his decision. This was, and it never was supposed to be his decision. So I just wonder if perhaps this was Beth Getz's way of saying, hey, this isn't how we evaluate either. I know that's not how Kirk evaluates, but Gary's gone. He was part of he obviously was in on this with Brian and with Kirk when the contract was made up initially. This is not how I am going to evaluate Brian as his immediate overseer, his boss, basically. And so I've seen enough to make a decision now, regardless of what happens the last 4 games. That's possible as well.